I miss that. I miss that. I remember having to be like, hey, pay attention to me. I'm back up here on stage, you know. We got together after a basketball game last night, some of the players and parents, and we sat down for some tacos. And it was just a lot of fun to just be with each other and laugh. And so I love that. That's what I get to hear when you guys do that. So we're coming out of a season, and like I say it's totally fitting. We had to pull like 5 tables together at this Mexican restaurant because it was like 3 or 4 of the players and all the parents, and we're just grabbing tables and out from underneath. And we had to even sit outside. Like we gathered this big table, 20 chairs around it, I don't know. But we're coming out of the season of gathering around tables, right? For Thanksgiving, I had my family came up, which was amazing. My mom was there, my dad, and my brother and his new wife were there, and that was only their second time being at our house, and so that was pretty cool to have them there, come up from down south. We had our family to our house for Christmas Eve, like the weather with the ice and everything, like it was gonna be the day before Christmas Eve because Christmas Eve's a little busy for us, but the weather pushed it to the day of Christmas Eve, which then made that day really busy, but we still gathered around a table for an intentional meal, and it was a big table. Like there was a lot of, at Christmas Eve it actually was just a few people. It wasn't a huge table, but we gathered together. New Year's, I did nothing. I sat by myself at midnight. I didn't get my New Year's kiss. Heather had to work the next day. Colby was at Macy's house. Avery was being the teenage girl that she is and hanging out in her room. We had negotiated with Micah because he wanted to sleep over the next night. We're like, you ain't staying up till midnight tonight then. And so he had already gone to bed, and I found myself just watching. I watched the New York drop, I watched the Nashville drop, and then I watched the Seattle drop. Just sitting there on my couch, hanging out. But still, I mean, you guys maybe had gotten together with parties and in food. But gathering for those meals and celebrations, I got the opportunity to gather and get to know my sister-in-law a little bit more, a new person. At that Christmas Eve dinner, Heather's 94-year-old grandma was there. So a lot of wisdom at that table, a new friend, and then at Christmas Eve, the wisdom of a 94-year-old. She might even be watching this morning. But gathering with people from different walks of life, different perspectives. A lot of us, whenever you gather at a table, there's a lot of differing understandings of things. And that all kind of caused me to kind of evaluate the different tables that I've sat at in my life. The different tables that I've sat across from people with. I've sat across from the table with people who are struggling with a terminal illness. I've sat across the table from people who were in financial despair. I've sat across from couples whose marriages were all but completely finished. I've shared the table with ideas that have changed many lives. I've sat at a table with an idea that was so incredibly personal and transforming for one life, either myself or the person that I sat across from. I've sat at the table with people who are excited about the future, and I've sat across the people who didn't have confidence for the next day. I've sat across the people who believed in themselves and people who didn't believe in themselves. I've shared tables with people who believed in me. I love those tables. But I've also sat across a table from people who thought I was the single reason for their despair and mess up in their life, the messiness of their life. I've sat across from people who felt like that they didn't understand truth or fully understood the truth. But truth be told, if I was to ask you to raise your hand, everybody here probably has a table in your house. And at that table, at some point or another, you've probably sat down at that table, maybe not necessarily for a meal or a snack or a cold drink or something, but with purpose and meaning, to discuss something, to positive or negative, have a deep and meaningful conversation, maybe to gain understanding, to strengthen, to come to an agreement, or maybe out of outright loss where you gathered. And at those tables, you probably have shared coffee or meals or snacks, and probably hope to have some of the most meaningful and life-giving conversations, but sometimes they tend to be times where life's stolen from you or taken. Like many of you, my life is busy. We're coming out of the busy season as well as we've gathered around tables where we feel like we maybe don't even have enough time, energy, space to attack those meaningful conversations, to have the growth that we're looking to have. This week, I sat with a friend of mine that I hadn't shared a cup of coffee with in a long time. We carved out 45 minutes, and it was a very meaningful 45 minutes. It meant a lot to me, and I think it meant a lot to him as well. Just a couple weeks ago, maybe you have somebody like this in your life. I hope that you do. I sat across the table from a friend of mine that we had planned for an hour because that's kind of all we had. And we sat at Woods Coffee on Lakeway, and when we broke our conversation, we realized that it had been 3 hours. It had been 3 hours of some of the most life-giving and meaningful growth and edifying conversation that it just happened. And we just equally shared and grew with each other. Coming off our time last week where we shared a table of communion together, as we head into this new year, we shared communion. I think it naturally causes us to assess the idea of that table and what the meaning of why we take communion and the importance of following Jesus and what he did for each one of us. And it causes us to think about the things that we allow to distract us or take some time and space at our table as well. And so as we get into this morning, I have to admit two things to you. A few months ago, I spoke on a message that was about feasting on the things of God rather than the things that aren't of God. The truth of Scripture and the truth of understanding of God's truth for us in our lives. And we talked about like what the table's set with and love, joy, peace, some of the fruits of the Spirit, and to feast on that stuff. And at that point, my friend Kim was reading a book, and she was sure that I was reading the same book as her. But at that time, I had never even heard of the book. And lo and behold, just this past week, our women's Bible study kicked off again. And they started this series, Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table. And Louis Giglio is the author. I love Louis Giglio. I had an opportunity when I first came to know Jesus to have a conversation with him when I was 18 years old in a field in Memphis, Tennessee. And he got a little tiny piece of a table that I was like really excited about at the time. But I have yet still not to read this book. But from what I understand about this book, and Heather's taking the study, and there's a good handful of other women that are taking the study, if what piques your interest today, what we're going to talk about, this book is a book that you will probably want to read and pick up and walk through. There's a study guide that goes along with it as well. So my original message stemmed from the verse, Psalm 23:5. And that was you, and this is David the psalmist, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. That was the mainstay of that verse back a couple months ago when I talked about it. I talked about, kind of some of the original meanings of that, and we focused in on that last time. God prepares that table for us. We don't have to prepare that table. We don't have to put in the work and the effort to procure the table or to prepare it for ourselves or gather all the stuff and gather all the people. Like, it's not our job to work hard at preparing. God prepares that table for us to sit at. In essence, a lot like communion. What God did prepared the table for us to take communion. And so we don't have to put in the work for that. Now, we looked at that aspect of it last time, and so I want to jump back a few verses before that this morning and talk about the idea of what kind of lays the foundation, lays the groundwork for that idea of God preparing the table for us. Psalm 23:1 says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And you've probably heard this verse before, but the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And one thing about that is the idea of a shepherd. I know I've talked about the analogy of a shepherd and sheep a lot before, but sheep aren't the smartest animals in the world. They basically go where the crook and the shepherd lead them, or they just wander off aimlessly. I relate more towards that sheep than anything else, but they aren't the smartest. So it's not like a compliment. But here's also the deal. Us as people allow or actually have shepherds in our lives. Things that we allow to direct us, lead us, take us in areas of our life. And we don't avoid that. And in fact, I mean, the closest thing to avoiding that is that if you allow yourself to be your own shepherd. Everything I want and I desire and everything I want and I need, I'm going to allow that to just lead me to the place that I want to go. But other than that, there's many other things that lead us in different areas of our life. Trends on TikTok, right? Social media and culture, money, happiness, achievement, yourself. And what kind of struck me at that list is the majority of the things on that list, well, a lot of them aren't bad, so to speak, anyways, but the majority of that list, when we allow that to shepherd us and lead us, that just leads us to desire more and to be in a position of want. I would ask that, for you to raise your hand and admit that you are or aren't in a position of want, but we'd just be a room full of like half the people that raise their hand, the other half would be liars, and then it would just be too awkward for all of us, right? And so, but we all know, because of the way we kind of operate in life, what it is to want something, like to want more, want attention, want status, want whatever it may be. Like I think we all can kind of understand that idea of it. And so for us, I think that it's in our ability to allow God to be that desire, that we can step away from the desire of grasping after power and fame and fortune and all those things, and to be in a position of just desire after, like I said with the kids, somebody who created us with purpose and meaning and ultimately wants the best for us. And then I love how it leads into, it really kind of sets the stage and it makes me feel good, but I love how the next verse, Psalm 23, says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." And you've probably heard that before, and you get the idea of a sheep grazing in a pasture, and eating some green things. But oftentimes I think to myself, I think it's more like, if I'm honest with myself, I see something like a Hershey Kiss. I like Hershey Kisses. I eat that Hershey Kiss. Oh, peanut butter cup. I really like peanut butter. Oh, a whole pack of peanut butter cups. Oh, right? And it just leads me down some road where I'm just, having great things. But we get distracted, and I think sheep often can find that green patch. I gotta finish this Hershey Kiss now. It's a candy cane one, so it'll make my breath smell good. But oftentimes we find the green patch, and then when that green patch has kind of been eaten up, we find the next green patch and the next green patch, and then we find ourselves down someplace and in some area that we never really thought that was gonna be the outcome. And in this verse, it says that he makes us lie down, but that making, that directing, that leading us is to an area where everything is provided. Everything we need, the greenest of pastures is right there for us to lay down in and rest in and be a part of, not be led astray. And it's ultimately what leads to that verse that we probably all know, that the one where the shepherd leaves the 99 to go after the one. Like I was the one at some point. Maybe you can relate to that, at being that one at some point that had wandered off. The 99 are great in their green pasture taken care of, but he's going to go after the one. He desires that one. And when we can stay in that spot and quit chasing those patches of green, those patches of delight, those patches of whatever, we find ourselves resting in a position that God ultimately has desired and designed us to be in. And then he says the next verse, he leads me beside still waters. And I thought about that verse too, because I like eating, I like drinking, I like that stuff. But I think there's some more purpose and meaning in that. He leads me beside still waters. How many times have you, how many of you did a polar plunge last week? There's a handful of us. It was fun. I was there, right? We did it. How many of you have ever done a polar plunge with a wool sweater? Right? Probably not a smart thing, right? How many of you tried to swim a lake with a wool sweater on, right? Sheep ultimately need the still waters, because if they get wet and swept in, man, they're weighed down and they just get swept away. And that's why God says here, still waters. I'm going to lead you to a place where the water is calm, there's peace, and you don't have to worry about the fear or the dangers of being swept away. Because it's my desire for you to just drink, just partake, without the worries of everything else that's going on, without the raging river that might sweep you away. He makes us lie down in green pastures, and he leads us beside still waters. And then we had a little sheep that said this part. Pushed his hand and it said, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear. I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Here's a truth moment for you. I mean, other than the tendency we get to be swept away and led astray. The truth moment for you, church, is the last couple weeks, I've been relatively defeated. I felt that. I felt defeated at times in life and everything that piles up. And I mean, we're coming after a busy, all of you are probably still recovering from the holidays, right? And I'm no different. But I felt relatively defeated, right? Dealing with the heartache I have for kids, my kids who have experienced things that I wish I could just help them through and make them make the right choice. Raising teenagers is fun, not always easy, but you have those moments where you feel that. I had a less than fun, I'm productive, but less than fun meeting to discuss our lease here in Sudden Valley. And then obviously the busyness of the holiday and kind of recovering from all that, but still actually gathering with family after the holiday because we didn't have time before the holiday. Like, it all kind of piles up, and I found myself in a position where I felt defeated, but it was nothing big. Like, it wasn't like lurking in the valley being a low spot in your life, right? You probably had valley moments and mountaintop moments in your life. I don't think it was like lurking in the shadow of death for me, but I had allowed it to take its shape. And then And then I got news of a valley of the shadow of death moment. And my mom's probably watching, and I love you, Mom, and I'll probably come and see you this week. But all the truth of the first few verses here is I love that God leads us. He leads us. He leads us even in the moment of all that stuff we have going on. He leads us to green pastures, and he leads us to still waters. And through the valleys where we're walking in the shadow of death and uncertainty. And I love the way that David, the psalmist, puts this because he makes it pretty definite. He says, even though I, David, the psalmist that praises God with basically every word that he writes on a piece of paper, says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Church, I don't need to tell you this, but we will all have valley moments in our lives. Lives where we feel low. Points in our lives where we feel defeated. Points in our lives where we maybe even flirt with death. Definitely points in our lives where we tangle with the enemy. And maybe even he gains some ground. Times where we are overcome with frustration and hardship, impossible news, a lack of understanding and comprehending. And it isn't that God promises that that's going to happen to you. He doesn't orchestrate it. But he makes it pretty clear that we're going to experience those moments. He makes it sound pretty definite that we're all going to have those moments in our lives. And here's one of the greatest things about this is that God promises that he has still prepared a table for us to sit at. That even though, like, you've been through some hard things in the last couple years, and God desires like this relationship with you. And to talk to you through it and lead you through it, and he has. Right? Same thing with you. Like, he's like, man, I'm here. Let's just talk. Let's work it out. Let's have that conversation. Let me strengthen you. Let me encourage you. Let me support you. Like, I'm here for you. And I desire to sit at that table with you. I desire for you to experience me, right? And that's that intimate relationship, that intimate idea of setting a table and leading us to the green pastures and into the still waters where we drink and where we experience, where we don't get swept away. We don't get distracted. We don't get down a path that maybe we shouldn't, or that we allow to just take control of our lives. And here's the problem that I see for us that happens, and I say it, we. When I say we, I mean me, and I'm hoping that you guys come along. Like, I'm an includer in this. Like, I want to include everybody, even in my falling short. So when I say we, I mean me. But we allow fear. We allow ideas, attitude, people, lies, insecurities, emotions, shiny things like, Hershey Kisses, addictions, coping mechanisms. We give them authority in our life. We give them a seat at the table, if we use the analogy, right? Like we say, well, pull up a chair, there's room for one more. And then we listen and we give space and attention. And I think at the end of it, I'm reminded of that table that we sat at Thanksgiving. It was a big table. And my dad sat at the very opposite end of the table. And I wasn't having any conversation with him because he was at the I mean, like I was in the living room and he was in the dining room. That's how big the table was on Thanksgiving. It was a great table. It was a big table. Ben loves big tables. It's a big table, but I wasn't having a conversation with my dad. And I think for us, all too often, and I don't want to diminish depression and anxiety, the things that we struggle, the things that you struggle with, those are very real things. But I think what we allow is we allow the space in the in everything going on. We allow it authority. We allow it to be a regular thing we just deal with. It's just a part of who I am. My anxiety, my depression, my insecurities, my emotions that I have. I'm just gonna. Man, everybody's got them. And we allow that fear that's manifested itself in that way to take up home. And it manipulates itself, and it grabs a hold, and we just allow it to be there. And it drowns out everything else. And my fear is that we allow those then to define us and who we are, what we focus on, the attention that we pay. And we allow it to take root and really substantially become a dominant thing in our lives. We allow the lies and the fears to wrap around us and choke us out at our own table. Not experiencing the life and the table and the desire that God has set for us. The glorious meal and the conversation and the meaningfulness of it all, we allow it to kind of fade away in the background because we've allowed something else to be more dominant and louder. 2 Corinthians says this, 2 Corinthians 11, 14, and 15 says, "And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It's not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be their actions, or their end will be that their actions deserve." And in that verse it talks about, Satan talks about the enemy masquerading itself, disguising itself as something that maybe is even desirable. Or maybe it is something that we just start believing in. It's the spirit of fear, and it's the spirit of the things that we struggle with that are disguised as things that just become dominant or become things that we go after in our lives. God calls us to be alert and sober-minded, watching out for the schemes of that, right? 1 Peter 5:8, "Be alert and sober-minded. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." And that's where this idea of this table, I think, really hit home for me. And I know it's a part of Louis' book. The enemy wants to take up as much space and time and attention and focus as he can in our lives, right? Circling and stalking and waiting for us to become tired or hungry or angry or compromised in any way and then take that space up. We call it buy the real estate we allow him to take. Where we're like, even having that one-on-one conversation, and then we're like, and God's like, no, focus, like on what like looking behind me in fear of what happened in the past or what's happening peripheral from me, what's going on all around me, what's happening in front of me. God's like, no, focus, like on me, like just stay here with me. I got you, right? You know what happens? You know what happens when we spend time with the freaking king of the universe? When our enemies are just all around us? We realize that everything we have, need, and desire is right there in front of us to take care of. To take care of the enemies that are prowling around us. That's what happens when we spend time with the King of the universe, the one that created each one of us with a desire and purpose for us to live in. Psalm 34:4 says, I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all of my fears. Church, the promise in that verse where it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. The promise that God gives us is that I am with you. He uses a rod and a staff for correcting and protecting, but ultimately it's to keep us in the position where we recognize that he is with us. That he is our hope as our enemies are prowling. That he is our hope in the uncertainty of yes, or in the guilt of yesterday and the uncertainty of tomorrow. That he is with us in the deepest of valleys, but also praising with us in the highest of mountains. But that he is with us. Even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Church, it's my prayer that we may know the Spirit of God who is living and active in Christ Jesus and what he did for each one of us, and that would be living and active in our lives. That when we sit down at the table, we recognize that our Father has the authority over everything else that is going on around us. The loudest of distractions and the quietest of distractions that we give the attention and time to. That when we say, I trust in Jesus. Like I've given my life to Jesus. Maybe you prayed the prayer when you were 14. Maybe you prayed the prayer when you were 44. Maybe today's the day. I don't know. But when we do that, it's not just merely that we punched our ticket and we get to hang out with God for eternity, right? It's that it actually unlocks and activates the Spirit of God within us and around us to take control of the environment and atmosphere and culture of everything that is going on around us. It's that authority. The authority to drown out and push away and bury everything else that distracts us. To launch a full-fledged attack on our fears, our insecurities, our uncertainty, our illnesses, a full-fledged attack so that we may find the peace, joy, and love in the presence of the Creator of all things. The Spirit of God you receive does not make you slaves so that you live in fear. Rather, the Spirit of God you received brought about your adoption and sonship. By him we cry, Abba, Father. By him we cry, Creator God, Father and author of everything. I trust you. I want to invite the band to come up now. And we're going to close in with a couple songs. And what I want for us to try to do is whatever it is that you have going on in your life. You've probably got a list like me. We prayed to just be open-handed to hear from God today. But I want us to enter into a time when we switch. Maybe you have switched, maybe you haven't switched. Your posture on thinking and comprehending everything that's going on in your life. to a position of just understanding the authority and what God desires for you. So as we close with these last two songs, I want for us to worship and praise and sing, but more so identify and put God in that rightful spot right now. And then, man, if it makes it to the parking lot, great. If it makes it till Tuesday, great. But that we could be reminded of this moment right now where we were able to do that together in support of each other and encouraging each other and building each other up, but most definitely in the presence of a God that's like right here with you right now and desires for you to be right here with him right now. Let's worship.